Magandang hapon sa lahat. Welcome to the fourth installment of our Philippine Indigenous Languages Lecture Series, or PILS, for the year 2023. This year-long series of public lectures was organized in celebration of the centennial founding anniversary of the UP Department of Linguistics and in solidarity with the International Decade of Indigenous Languages between 2022 and 2032, as declared by the United Nations, by the UNESCO. Okay, so I'm Range Gonzalez. I'll be your moderator this afternoon. This event is being live streamed on the official Facebook page and YouTube channel of the UP Department of Linguistics. For those tuned in, you may type your questions and feedback in the respective comment sections of both platforms, and we will try to address them after the talk. We request that you keep your queries concise, to the point, and respectful. You may also use the hashtag #UPLingPils for posting your additional thoughts, insights, and other engagements on social media. Okay, so this afternoon, I am pleased to introduce to you a good friend who will be our speaker this afternoon.
Hello.
Hello, my friend. So I'm pleased to welcome again our speaker, Ms. Honeylet Dumoran, a PhD candidate at the UP Department of Linguistics. She has done grammar work on Mindanao languages such as Salog-Subanen, Kamayo, or Mandaya, and Talaandig. Her current research is on Bilic languages, which includes Tboli, Blaan, Teduray, and Klata. So Honeylet has a master's degree in English language studies, and she is a member of the faculty of the Department of English of Mindanao State University Iligan Institute of Technology. So, Honeylet, the virtual floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. I am happy to be here to be part of PILS. This afternoon, I am presenting on the Bilic languages. As Rinch has said, Bilic is a family of languages composed of Tboli, Blaan, Teduray, and Klata. So in this presentation, I will contextualize the interest on the Bilic family. I will do this by presenting a survey of the works that have been done on Bilic. And then I will move on to present some preliminary analysis that I have done on the family. And I organize this presentation, the presentation of these analyses, according to the directions that we can take in the analysis of the family. So I will mention, towards the end, I will mention an ideal framework for Bilic, as well as the components of such a framework. I will end this presentation with a summary on how the Bilic languages compare internally, meaning how they compare among each other and how they compare with the rest of the Philippine languages and other symmetrical voice languages. So I have a prepared presentation for you that will be played at this time.
Occidental, Teduray, spoken in Maguindanao, and Klata, spoken in Davao del Sur. Still very little is known about the Bilic family, but what we do know has always positioned Bilic apart from the rest of the Philippine languages. The most radical of these positions is Reed 1982, which not only proposes that Bilic excludes itself from the rest of the languages spoken in the Philippines, but also that Bilic forms a primary branch of Proto-Austronesian. In 2020, following Blust's resurrection paper, Reed formally retracted this position. However, That Bilic is characterized by features aberrant to the expected features of a Philippine language is well recognized in the literature. Blust 1992 comments that this group appears to diverge rather sharply from other languages of the archipelago. He notes that the often noted aberrant character of the South Mindanao languages is most simply explained as a product of their highly innovative nature. In his earlier Greater Central Philippine Hypothesis paper, Blust concedes that Bilic is different. Savage, 1986, an important diachronic work on the reconstruction of Proto-South Mindanao, finds three characteristics that distinguish the Bilic family from other Philippine languages. They have a 7-vowel system instead of a 3 or 4-vowel system like other Philippine languages. They have developed initial consonant clusters, and they have word final H. And then in the Demise Resurrection papers, which are key works for or against the unity hypothesis of the Philippine languages, Reed and Blust review other positions. In these positions, the aberrant features of Bilic have been used to exemplify the disunity in Philippine languages. Among these features are those identified by Reed. No medial nasal infixation, no mang prefix, the unique loss of aspect marking, and the unique retention of pan-proto-glottal stop as a backed velar stop. Each of these points are addressed by Blust in Resurrection and answered by Reed in his response. Elsewhere, in an important work on Western Austronesian typology, Himmelman 2005 laments on the scarcity of information about the Bilic family. These features, as well as the other features of Bilic, unique or otherwise, are the subject matter of this presentation. From 1951, there are at least 30 works that have been written specifically on the Bilic languages. In this chart, we see that the highest numbers of linguistic works on any of the Bilic languages occurred before the 1970s. Blaan appears to be the subject of most of these works, while Klata has been the subject in only 2 linguistic works, Evans' 2017 extensive work on phonology and Zorc's 2019 paper on the subgrouping of Klata as non-Bilic. Overall, Blaan and Tboli have the most linguistic works written on them. None of these, however, pertain to a grammar of Blaan. Works on Blaan have been on its morphology and syntax. On the other hand, 3 major linguistic works have been done on Tboli: a grammar, a pedagogical grammar, and a bilingual dictionary. Important works on Teduray are 2 lexicographic works, a multilingual dictionary and a bilingual dictionary. This figure presents the type of linguistic work that has been done on Bilic. As this shows, most of these are lexicographic works. These include, for the large part, dictionaries for Tboli and Teduray, and word lists for Blaan and Klata. The latest published dictionary for this family is the 720-paged SIL-published Tboli Dictionary in 2004. There is, therefore, a need to produce newer dictionaries for Tboli, Blaan, Teduray, and Klata. Syntactic analyses comprise the next biggest portion of the literature. These include papers on voice, previously treated as verbal orientation, or focus. The latest paper in these works is published in 1977, a very poor turnout for a 4-member family of languages that has been studied since the 1950s. Syntactic analyses need to be updated, and syntactic investigations need to be conducted urgently in Bilic. Studies on the Bilic phonological systems are dated, with the latest having been published in 1966. The works on Blaan and Tboli that are in this category are phonetic descriptions and not descriptions of the phonological systems. In other words, there is no relevant phonological work on Bilic save Evans' 2017 phonological description of Klata. The subject for diachronic papers, which make up 10% of the inventory, include an important work on the reconstruction of Proto-Southern Mindanao or Proto-Bilic by Savage in 1986. 2 papers on discourse investigates a similar phenomenon in Teduray. Blaan discourse and paragraph structure is described by McLachlan and Blackburn in 1971. There are no other discourse investigations on the Bilic languages. The grammar work in this inventory are grammar sketches appended to lexicographic works. There are currently no grammars for Teduray, Blaan, and Klata. The SIL published Tboli grammar is almost 50 years old and urgently needs an update from its tag mimic analysis. Not one of the works inventoried here has studied Bilic as a family, just as none has investigated the typological features that set it apart from other Philippine language families. The Bilic research gap has never been clearer. The exclusions of the family from subgrouping hypotheses, the scarcity of research that would not only describe how Bilic is different but also account for the same, and the lack of grammars and dictionaries for the indigenous communities that speak the languages all indicate that research work on the Bilic languages is imperative and urgent. But the need for grammars supersedes any other linguistic work in terms of urgency, and a grammar that is written in a framework that enables typological comparison for a family as typologically important as Bilic does not only address the gaps in the literature, but also forges a direction towards which future work may be done. One of the salient differences in the Tagalog and the Bilic verbal systems is the distinction in the reales. While Tagalog makes a distinction between kumain and kumakain, or between perfective and imperfective, the Bilic verbs do not carry this aspect distinction. While Tagalog encodes this distinction through reduplication in the imperfective aspect, Blaan encodes incompleteness through aclitic if the distinction needs to be made. This feature seems to be a characteristic feature of the Bilic languages. The paradigm in Figure 4 shows that the Bilic language Tboli also does not distinguish between perfective and imperfective aspects in its begun verbs, and therefore only has one class of realis verbs. This realis class also does not differ from the irrealis class, except in the agentive mag forms that do not carry any marking. Both facts indicate that all verbs in Tboli belong to one class only. As the paradigm shows, Tboli verbs do not carry aspectual marking, and aspect is not a relevant grammatical feature in Tboli verbs. The same is true in Blaan. Blaan verbs are also not marked for aspect, nor for modality. In other words, temporal marking is not encoded in Blaan and Tboli. The affixes that we see in the Tboli and Blaan verbs are voice affixes. This temporal feature varies somewhat in Klata, where a spectral marking is also not employed, but where a distinction in the realis and irrealis is encoded. Irrealis verbs in Klata are unmarked for modality, while realis verbs take various modality marking, namely the replacive N for the M-marked irrealis agentive verb, the prefixes bo and ta for patientive verbs, and the prefix ko for locative verbs. Instrumental voice is not marked on Klata verbs. The replacive N in Klata is an example of the portmanteau verbal affix distinctive for Philippine-type languages. This portmanteau affix N in Klata verbs is a marker for both agentive verb and realis modality. In the Bilic language Teduray, what is encoded by a portmanteau in Klata and in many Philippine languages remains to be encoded separately by two different affixes, by the infix for agentive voice and by the infix n for realis. This Teduray reflex of the in series retains the ancestral morphology that have coalesced in many Philippine languages, including Klata. In diachronic literature, this has been described as the loss of aspect marking, seen as not uncommon in languages in the Philippines. So it can be said that there is a total loss of aspect marking in Tboli, Blaan, Teduray, and Klata. Some temporal marking is encoded only in the realis by a modality affix in Teduray and Klata. The Philippine languages, like other Austronesian languages, have a system of marking the agentive voice with two sets of affixes: the infix and its variants, and the prefix mag and its variants. The reasons for this subcategorization is language-specific, ranging from phonological motivations to syntactic ones, such as marking distinctiveness of the roots or marking transitivity. This same system is seen in Teduray, where there is a group of agentive verbs that takes the affix and another group that takes the affix mag. In Tboli and Blaan, the agentive voice is marked only by the infix but both languages also have a group that takes no marking. This is to say that the distinction in the M forms, while retained in Tboli and Blaan, is retained through a set that is marked and a set that is unmarked. This unmarked group could be the mag form, but it could also be a group that subcategorizes for other features such as distinctiveness, as in Southeast Sulawesi, or transitivity, as in Kelabit. While the three other languages of the family retain some distinction in the agentive, Klata only has one agent voice marker. Unlike Teduray, which has both M forms and mag forms, all agentive verbs in Klata are marked with the affix M. That Tboli and Blaan only mark one set, and that Klata marks all agentive verbs with M, but that Teduray retains mag and M, indicate a progression from prototypical Philippine-type voice alternation typology. It is unsurprising then to see other features that deviate from this typological characterization. The undergoer voices, patientive, locative, and instrumental, are not distinguished formally in the Bilic languages. Patientive and locative verbs take the same marking, while instrumental voice marking is not encoded on Bilic verbs. In Tboli and Blaan, the voice marking for the patientive and locative voice is the infix N. This means that all Tboli and Blaan non-agentive verbs are marked similarly, and together with the agentive voice, what is traditionally known as the Bilic group of Blaan and Tboli has only two voice alternations. The same may be true in Teduray, where patientive verbs are also encoded by either the infix N or the suffix N. While the current data that is available for Teduray locative voice is inconclusive, preliminary data do suggest that Teduray might also not have more than one formal marker for the undergoer voices. For Klata, the non-agentive voice marker is the suffix a. For the patientive voice, Klata has two sets. One set takes no affix, and another set takes an o suffix. Klata verbs that reference locative information are marked by a. Both the patientive o and the locative a are originally on and an affixes, but Klata drops its word final n. Like in Tboli and Blaan, instrumental voice marking is not encoded on Klata verbs. Klata, unlike Tboli, Blaan, and Teduray, distinguishes between two undergoer voices. The voice features of the Bilic family of languages are as follows. All are marked for agentive voice, patientive voice, and locative voice. All are unmarked for instrumental voice. There is no distinctive marking in non-agentive voices, except in Klata, but the marking is by modality affixes, not voice affixes. And Bilic is also characterized by the loss of mag form in the agentive voice in all except in Teduray. Bloss proposed a typology of focus or voice systems for Austronesian languages. Under Type 1 are 4-term languages or full focus languages such as Tagalog. Type 2 are 3-term languages or reduced focus languages. Type 3 are 2-term languages with a portmanteau infix in, and which are two voice systems whose undergoer voices are obligatorily perfective. And Type 4 are 2-term languages without the portmanteau affix in. Of these four types, Bloss identifies only Type 1 and Type 2 as Philippine-type. Bilic, therefore, having a two-voice alternation, does not exhibit a Philippine-type voice system. But Bilic has strong indications for type 3 because other than having just two voices, its undergoer voices are also obligatorily perfective. We have exemplified this earlier for Tboli, Blaan, and Teduray, whose undergoer voices are all marked by the portmanteau infix N, which also marks realis, and for Klata, where undergoer voices are only distinguished in the perfective. Blost says that type 3 languages, such as what we have shown for Bilic here, have properties that are difficult to account for in a synchronic analysis without recognizing that such languages once had more complex systems. The simplification in the voice systems of languages such as Bilic from a more complex Philippine-type voice system such as that of Tagalog has been attested in some languages in Western Austronesian. Future research involving the Bilic languages, therefore, would benefit from a diachronic perspective and would inform much of how the family should be treated in future linguistic work. Two main types of languages have been widely recognized for Western Austronesian: symmetrical voice languages and pre-post-possessor languages. Pre-post-possessor languages are characterized primarily by possessors that precede their possessum, a clear-cut syntactic distinction between verbs and nouns, an SVO pattern, and a nominative-accusative alignment. Symmetrical voice languages, on the other hand, are characterized by multiple voice alternations marked on the verb, the lack of a clear syntactic distinction between nouns and verbs, a predicate initial pattern, and non-nominative accusative alignments. Symmetrical voice languages have two subclasses, Indonesian-type and Philippine-type. The Philippine-type languages are a subclass of symmetrical voice languages distinctive for having at least two formally and semantically different undergoer voices in addition to the agentive voice, none of which is derived from another. The two other distinctive features for Philippine-type languages are the presence of at least one non-local phrase-marking clitic for nominal expressions and the occurrence of pronominal second-position clitics. Geographically, Philippine-type languages include the languages spoken in the Philippines, in Taiwan, in northern Sulawesi, and in northern Borneo. Of these parameters for Philippine typeness, 4 are marked on the verb: voice, a portmanteau voice mood marking morphology, a realis and non-realis distinction, and the absence of applicative morphology. There are 5 other parameters for Philippine typeness, but which are not marked on the verb: the presence of at least one non-local phrase marking clitic for nominal expressions, pronominal second position clitics, pronominal possessors may precede their possessum, minimal inventories of primary prepositions, and the use of honorific articles. Bilic is found to have no honorific articles, and they have minimal inventories of primary prepositions, like other Philippine languages. Of these parameters, the first 3 weigh more, typologically. In fact, the presence of multiple phrase marking paradigms is among the 3 distinctive features for Philippine-type languages. We will exemplify this parameter in Bilic, because Bilic exhibits a much more simplified phrase marking system that is atypical for this Philippine criterion. Philippine-type languages have a system of phrase marking that involves one paradigm for personal nouns and another paradigm for non-personal nouns. We see in this table that all 4 Bilic languages mark the subject argument. Tboli and Blaan do not mark non-subject or arguments, while Teduray and Klata do. Klata does this with a marker similar to the Tagalog nang, with the marker neng. Teduray, on the other hand, employs the same marker it uses for the subject argument, making this marker the marker for all non-local arguments, including possessors. Each Bilic language also has its distinct marker for non-core locative arguments: Tboli B, Blaan D, Teduray dob, and Klata ta. Generally, the phrase marking paradigms in Bilic consists only of two phrase markers, one for local arguments and another to mark non-personal noun phrase subjects and genitives. All personal names do not co-occur with phrase markers in Tboli and Blaan. All obliques in Bilic are not marked. The exemption to this behavior is Klata, which exhibits full phrase marking paradigms such as what are seen in other Philippine languages like Tagalog and Cebuano. This means that Klata has the complete sets of phrase markers for both personal and non-personal noun phrases. So in this parameter distinctive for Philippine-type languages, which is the presence of at least one non-local phrase marking clitic for nominal expressions, the Bilic languages Tboli, Blaan, and Teduray qualify just barely, with these languages bearing only minimal sets of just two phrase markers. Blust also summarizes the features of Philippine-type languages into just three features: three or more focuses, verbal affixation, and nominal and pronominal marking. Mapping the data from the Bilic languages as discussed onto the sets of criteria for Philippine typeness suggests that the Bilic languages are transitioning from being Philippine-type languages. First, they no longer exhibit the Philippine-type voice system. Second, the verbal morphology no longer carries a spectral marking. And third, except for Klata, Bilic has retained only a minimal set of phrase marking systems consisting only of two phrase markers. In other words, like Type 3 languages, whenever the Bilic languages exhibit Philippine-type features, they do so with much more simplified systems, indicative of a development from more complex systems such as those exhibited by other Philippine languages. An ideal analytical framework for Bilic, therefore, is one that is able to describe these features as well as it is able to account for their development in Bilic. Specifically, the components of a good framework for Bilic in this work are the following: able to explain the subregularities in agentive voice marking, the non-marking in one class in Tboli and Blaan, the loss of the mag class in Klata, and retention in Teduray. One that is able to describe subject alternation in the undergoer voices. One that is able to diagnose core-periphery distinction. One that would aptly identify syntactic alignment. And one that would allow more succinct classification of nonverbal predication. It should also be able to determine and describe modality behavior in the verbal system, and can account for the simplification in phrase marking systems, as well as one that is able to describe whether word order figures into the function that it is expected to perform in lieu of the absent noun phrase markers, and one that can place the synchronic description of Bilic into the typological classifications of Western Austronesian languages in order to describe its development. I will now demonstrate that components 1 to 5 are best satisfied by a symmetrical voice framework. The same framework is also able to fit neatly into typological classifications and enables an effective comparison of typological features that would satisfy components 7 to 9. The analysis determines which features are relevant to Bilic morphosyntax. This clearly does not include aspect. It is voice that is the pertinent verbal feature in Bilic. In addition to voice, transitivity is the other relevant grammatical feature. For example, the difference in the AV-marked constructions in this pair is accounted for by transitivity. However, transitivity is not overtly marked. A large number of verbs will be labile. These are verbal stems that allow both transitive and intransitive inflections. This is exemplified by the Tboli labile verb yen or sit, which may occur in an intransitive construction and in a transitive construction. In the transitive, the UV marked yen takes a locative subject overtly marked by ye. It is clear at this point that there are two paradigms that relate in the argument structure in Bilic verbal predications: transitivity and voice. In this paradigm, transitivity and voice relate to each other in these ways. All intransitive constructions are AV marked, whether the verb takes an agent or patient subject. Transitive constructions are either in the agentive voice or the undergoer voice. Agentive transitive verbs are AV marked and take an agent subject, and undergoer transitive verbs are all UV marked and take patient, theme, and locative subjects. These factors indicate that Bilic favors a valency-neutral approach in the analysis of its morphosyntax, rather than a voice aspect approach, or rather than a valency-changing approach, such as one in an ergative applicative framework. Such a framework assumes the existence of a basic clause, from which other clauses are derived. An argument may be demoted, or the verb detransitivized. This is exemplified by a language such as Waray being analyzed as ergative, and where the verbal affixes indicating location and instrument in the absolutive are treated as applicative morphology. In my manuscript, I demonstrate the complications of an ergative applicative framework for Bilic. Bilic is best described using a valency-neutral framework which treats the alternations in the transitive as equally basic, rather than a derivation from another. Bilic may be analyzed as exhibiting an SO alignment, where the single argument of the intransitive clause shares the same marking with the object of the transitive clause, and thus may be seen to exhibit an ergative alignment. However, as this shows, this would only be true if a UV-marked transitive is mapped onto an intransitive. Alternately, if an AV-marked transitive is mapped onto an intransitive, Bilic will show non-ergative alignment. This is quintessentially the behavior of a symmetrical alignment system. It is neither ergative nor non-ergative. Symmetrical voice alignment is a system of alignment characterized by the presence of competing transitive patterns. Rather than a single basic transitive pattern, as is analyzed in ergative and accusative alignment systems, this approach maintains that among the multiple transitive constructions within the voice system, none is basic or derived from another, and each voice employs a different mapping between semantic roles and grammatical relations. Symmetricality, therefore, is a system for transitive clauses. The morphosyntactic features of symmetrical voice alignment are: each verb in each type of voice has its own distinct verbal affix. There is only one privileged syntactic argument or PSA in each type, and none of the arguments in the transitive clauses is converted into an oblique following voice alternation. Bilic exhibits two distinct voice affixes, one for agentive voice and another for undergoer voice. These are the AV markers M and MUG and the UV markers N and Klata A. This means that a transitive clause in Bilic may either be in the agentive voice or the undergoer voice, each marked distinctly by its respective affix. The second parameter pertains to a unique subject. Multi-argument clauses such as this Klata sentence only mark one argument as subject. In this case, the subject is hudu or lad, marked with the subject marker, keng. The non-subject core arguments or objects of the transitive verb and the agent of the transitive verb, which is also a non-subject core argument, take the same marking, neng. Chen and MacDonald distinguish between these two core non-subject arguments by assigning NPIV1 or non-pivot 1 to objects and NPIV2 to agents of the transitive verb. The third parameter may also be exemplified by the Klata alternations in 48, where an overt subject marker is employed. In 48A, this marks hudu, lad, and in 48B, this marks kendi. In addition to bearing non-core properties such as omissibility, an oblique is oblique marked. However, the similarity in marking renders the diagnosis of oblique status as challenging. In Tboli and Blaan, obliques are unmarked, as are non-subject core arguments. Establishing the core status of an argument, therefore, requires a longer roster of properties, as identified by Reisberg 2014. But preliminarily, we can contrast the NPIV2 marked non-subject argument and the oblique marked argument in this sentence. The oblique phrase is freely omissible, while the omission of the NPIV2 marked argument is dispreferred. Himmelman observes that given that all kinds of argument expressions are freely omissible, it is somewhat remarkable that actor expressions in undergoer voice constructions are rarely omitted in symmetrical voice languages. This implies that actor expressions are more core-like rather than oblique-like. In summary, symmetricality in Bilic is manifested in the two parameters that Reisberg 2014 identifies. First is morphological symmetry. None of the voices is morphologically unmarked. And second, argument symmetry. The two arguments are direct core arguments. Comparing the features across the Bilic family shows that Tboli and Blaan always group together. Klata is the least similar with the rest, bearing at least some distinction in the undergoer voices and also bearing temporal marking and full phrase marking paradigms. Teduray behaves apart from the rest in that it retains the ancestral voice aspect affix series and the distinction in the agentive and mag forms. These retentive morphology places Teduray as the least innovative of the Bilic languages, with Klata closest to the other Philippine-type languages and Tboli and Blaan bearing the simplest of all voice and aspect systems. With the current data, I analyze Bilic as languages in transit, exhibiting a two-way voice alternation and minimal phrase marking systems like Indonesian-type languages. Bearing at least one paradigm of person marking system, a generally characteristic non-occurring feature in Philippine-type languages, but also bearing characteristic Philippine-type features such as pronominal second position clitics and post-post pronominal possessors. The set of features that the Bilic family exhibits is unique only to the extent that current research reveals. Further work will situate the family better. Analyses of current data inform how these would best move forward in terms of framework and perspective, but everything proceeds from a description of what is essentially Bilic.
Ringe, I think you're muted.
Sayang yung aking sinabi. So,
Wala. Ulit na lang ulit.
uh,
Rewind.
anyway, thank you very much for that presentation. I think this is the first time that I really or I encountered Bilic in this way, this group of languages, because I'm coming from parang Cordilleran background, which is quite different talaga from this group of languages. And I appreciate that you're working on this language because on this group of languages because it really exhibits yung mga unique features that challenges yung ating mga notions about Philippine languages. So before I read through yung mga questions, I'd like to ask muna, how far along are you with your research?
So the analysis that I presented here are part of a longer ongoing work. So preliminary analysis pa lang ito in order for me to build my dissertation project. So what you saw are actually some parts of what I included in my proposal. The proposal really for the dissertation work is to compare the Bilic family with each other. So it's an internal comparison, and then a comparison of the group with other groups of the Philippine language, other Philippine language families,
Mhm.
and also with other Philippine type languages. So as you would know, I mean, you would actually relate na when we begin an analysis, for example, the questions reveal themselves. So
Mhm.
data, for example, when we analyze data, sometimes the data would not yield to a certain framework, and then you have to be, of course, you have to pause, and then you have to ask a different question or take it to a different direction. So this is actually a long this has been a long ano na, work
Mhm.
on the Bilic languages. So the data is still preliminary. I am still currently collecting data, and also with that, currently also analyzing the data as they come.
Okay. So in relation to the data and the collection of the data, there's a question here from our department chair. So can you talk about the nature of your data? Are these elicited or did you also record naturalistic speech? So
Right.
aside from
So,
that.
yung first na type of the data that I used are, because I use several types of data. So I have secondary data, and I also have preliminary data. So yung secondary data, these are from, because I am comparing aspects of the grammar. Yung ideal situation, I will mention it na lang. Yung ideal situation really of the study, no, is for me to really go and do the grammar of Tboli, do the grammar of Blaan, do the grammar of Teduray, and do the grammar of Klata. No? That's really like ideal. So everything, yung questions, for example, yung data, for example, na elicited are all, parang elicited na similarly, ganyan. So, the comparative work allows for secondary na data. So I got secondary data from published data for because Tboli has two grammars, no, a pedagogical one and a reference grammar of Tboli. But as I've said in the presentation, these are old na mga grammars SIL published. So I used some data there, and I also collected data on my own from my Tiboli and Blaan informants. And Edward Estrella, very kindly shared to me his data on Klata, because Edward is doing very good work on Klata also. So he's doing the reference grammar of Klata right now. And this is the beauty of doing work that are similar at the same time, because you can consult with each other. Edward and I will always we'll talk to each other about, oh, this is what I found, and this is what I found in Teduray. So
That's
it enriches both of our analyses. No. Also, I have to mention that data from this paper were collected during the pandemic. So um, this had to be, anong tawag dyan, like a video conference na data collection.
yes. Thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. Ano, no, it's helpful talaga if you have someone to work with kahit
Yes.
hindi kayo talaga working on the same research, but it's very helpful to have somebody that you can talk to and share analysis with. So it's really nice to be in a community of researchers ba, something like that. So speaking of Edward, he has this paper. There's a question here. So he has this paper na binabanggit na ang terminong bilik daw ay is referring lang to the two varieties of Blaan. So what do
Mm.
you think about that?
Right, right. So si Edward, of course, yung mga we refer to previously published works, no, when we employ these stances, perspectives in our own work, where we anchor our own work. In the literature, Bilic and Southern Mindanao refer to a similar subgroup of languages spoken in Mindanao. This would always, because the internal subgrouping of the Bilic languages has been the subject of contention also. Not just So yung membership ng family has been subject to contention also. Not just the yung grammatical features niya and yung mga aberrant features niya. So this would always include Blaan and Tboli. Scholars like Thomas and Healy, you would know, Diane, Savage, for example, all so that we could say that traditionally Bilic does refer to Blaan and Tiboli always together. It would be, let me read from my ano. In later subgrouping words, this would include Teduray and Klata. This is Walton, 1979, McFarland, 1980, Zorc, 1986, plus 1991 and 1992. It would be Conklin in 1955, as cited in Blust, who would be the earliest to group Teduray with Blaan and Tiboli in a southern Philippine group. But I have to mention the term Bilic referring to the four languages recognized to constitute it today has been used by Reed, by Zorc, 1986, by Zorc in 1986, and Blas also. But in a very recent publication, Zorc 2019 revises his position to exclude Klata from the subgrouping and to
Mhm.
propose that Klata singularly occupies a separate branch of Mindanao languages he subgroups as Southern Philippines. And so Zorc presented a different set of evidence, and my morphological analysis in this work, as you would see, would always also point to that, would also
Uh-huh.
point to a parallel na trajectory. And this is to say that always morphosyntactically, Klata would always be different from the rest. So Blaan, as I said, Blaan and Tiboli always group together. Tiduray will have the retentive na mga features,
Uh-huh.
and Klata will always be similar to the other prototypical Philippine type na mga languages, bearing, for example, a locative voice, bearing also full phrasal markers, unlike the other na mga Bilic languages. So the term Bilic, the term Bilic, you can use it with this much, ano, with this much para this much na
Broker.
caveat to it, this much caveat to it. Oo.
Ayun. So, I guess, I hope that answers naman the question. So, we have another one here. Can you talk about, since these groups are indigenous people groups,
Mm-mm.
so can you share with us your process of like obtaining consent or your mga ethical procedures and methods that you have used while
Yes.
gathering your data?
Yeah, I appreciate the measures that are now being implemented. First, in UP, in our department, for example, or in our college in UP, we go through a process, a research. We go through a process called an ethical review board, an ethical review of your research. So
Mhm.
it requires you parang a preliminary list of the consent na mga forms, consent na. Basta we have to, consent is a very like consent is a highlighted na feature of that board, no. And also I had to secure an NCIP permit um in order to study the Bilic languages. So I had to write nationally, and I had to write ano, baliktad. I had to write regionally, and then I had to write nationally. And then for Teduray, because Tboli and Blaan belong to one region, one
Uh-huh.
NCIP. Tapos yung Teduray, I had through Edward, di ba si Edward is a godsend. Through Edward, I had to ask the chieftain talaga, the Timuway na chief nila. It's called an ICC, yung community talaga, and we acquire their consent. So what I'm saying is, no longer do we encourage or allow going to the community and just getting data from the community. No, we have to
Yes.
go through. No, we have to go through these processes, and I think these processes are there for a reason, and they have to be followed.
Yes, I agree. So that's very true. Parang it will parang defeat
Mm-mm.
yung hard work mo later if later naman you cannot publish it, no? People will not acknowledge your work. Parang sayang if you will. parang all your hard work will be put to waste if you don't work with the community and get their
Pero
consent.
Lynch, di ba, you also work with, you also work on the ground talaga. Yours is asking consent from the community. Oh, the community actually consult you, correct? Sa
Yeah,
sayaw. Because
something
Lynch is,
like that. So I think consent is multi-level. So it depends on the community kung anong consent yung kailangan nila. So pwede siyang yung barangay level o yung ICC level. Pwede ding yung iba, they needed NCIP to help them with parang granting consent. So madaming paraan. So it's a matter of like really finding out what is needed by the community to allow you to do research.
yeah, correct, correct.
Good. So there's another question here. I'm enjoying this. uh,
Sana all.
so I'll just read. No, I accept sabi dito. I think Bilic would contribute a great deal to questions about language change. There is an ongoing project entitled Where Does Grammar Come From, which takes the development of Austronesian languages as starting point. Within this language family, some languages do clearly structure their sentences around categories of subject and object, while others seem to be organized in a different way, which more directly reflects communicative concerns such as aspect of comment pala. So I think this is a comment from our chair. So,
Mm-mm-mm. I forgot to underscore pala kanina yung importance ng natural data where
mhm,
you really converse with the native speakers and not just ask bitaw not just ask elicited not just ask them to answer an elicited
uh-uh.
instrument for
Grammatical
elicitation.
paradigms, no?
Oo, ganyan. Oo. So there are so many things that cannot be parang hindi makacapture ng elicited na material. I mean, via an instrument, no? So, yeah, I've been finding out because Ridge and I, we also talk about similar na mga items that we find in our work because Ridge is also doing work also sa northern languages. So we have South Mindanao languages from my end, and Ridge's work is on northern Mindanao. So
Northern
sometimes
Luzon.
really, northern, sorry, northern Luzon because hers is on the Cordilleran languages. Langga, no?
Mhm.
No? Oo. So, for example, paradigms on person marking, for
Oh,
example,
yes.
is which is a characteristically non-occurring feature in Philippine-type languages. No, occurs in the northern Philippine languages, like Range's languages, yung work ni Range. And also, I've been finding some evidence of that in Tboli. So I did not include this yet, but I did mention it in the end, of my presentation, because the that is not ready because it's the analysis for that is not ready yet. But I do find some indications of person marking also
Mhm.
in Bilic. So,
Mhm.
since for example, these are characteristic no na non-Philippine type. So, Bilic will parang it's unsurprising ba? It's almost unsurprising anymore that Bilic will have something like that. So,
Mhm.
questions such as why, questions such as how did the Bilic languages develop, no? And we have good na mga analyses already out there that we can compare our synchronic analysis of Bilic or any language family, for example, because works like Ross's work, Reed's work, Chen and McDonald's, Chen's work, and Gallego's work, for example, are there. We can compare their
Mhm.
findings with ours. For example, if you take this trajectory, no? So yeah, there is a lot to be that can be had if we make available analyses such as this one about the Bilic family, or I'm sure about other Philippine languages that are not as studied as other Philippine languages.
That's mali. Meron pala akong blooper. Yung comment pala ni Ma'am Tina ay may continuation. Ayun.
Nice.
So, basahin ko ulit yung ano na lang, yung quoted. So sabi niya, within this language family, some languages do clearly structure their sentences around the categories of subject and object, while others seem to be organized in a different way, which more directly reflects communicative concepts such as which aspects of a situation the speaker considers to be most important. So this suggests that even the most basic properties of grammatical structure are best understood as stemming from the function of human language as a system of communication.
Right, right. I
Totoo, no?
agree.
So
Oo.
sabi niya, tapos ito pa, it might be good to check the developments in this project for future work. Totoo, parang it cannot really, parang if you will just rely, although there is use for elicited sentences, for example, pero yung if you collect yung natural language, there's so much
Mhm.
talaga na masu-surprise ka. And yun nga, it's you can see through what yung really parang how they put value on what they try to communicate. No?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Correct.
So there's another question here from Rohan Von Bichara Alpha Lopez. At sabi niya, is Klata really part of the Bilic? Why is it treated as a separate?
Separate separate node in different classifications. Oh,
Ayun, good
I think
insight.
that's node. Um,
Already answer
okay.
this kanina, no?
Yeah, pero I failed to say na I have to highlight yung the type of evidence na
Mm-mm.
that we usually offer for subgrouping analysis. Ang type of evidence that we usually offer for subgrouping analysis are yung mga phonological na evidence and phonetic no na evidence range, no? Tama ako? Tama ba
Mm.
ako? Please correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, so different ang set of evidence that are offered for subgrouping hypothesis.
That's
So, as I mentioned kanina, si Zorc has said na, has given, has proposed a set of evidence saying na Klata should not be grouped with the Bilic languages, with the other three Bilic languages, and should occupy a node of its own. That's the latest one, 2019.
okay. So ayun ay nasa based on evidences from comparative evidence. Ito na meron naman siyang question, siguro ano naman to, psycholingual side na aspect to, intelligibility. Do Bilic speakers struggle in learning other Philippine languages because of the type of alignment that it has?
I don't think. I cannot say categorically if it affects that this ability. The safest thing that I can say probably is that these are two different things, no? Yung a capability, yung performance of a speaker does not really rely on the whether or not Philippine type alignment ba yung grammar, I mean yung alignment ng isang language, no? Let me rephrase this question if I can. Do they struggle in learning other Philippine languages? Um, I do not have data because this will require a different set of asking questions, so a different set of questions to answer. So my proposal here, my presentation here is on the grammar na aspect, yung analysis of the grammar. So it's good if we have questions like this. We will include this in future work on the Bilic languages. Definitely, maybe as the introductory part, no, to the grammar analysis.
Ayun. So there's another question from Ma'am Elsie. Do you have data on relative clause constructions and do they align with the argument marked as the privileged syntactic argument that you identified in these languages? I think this might provide further evidence that there is privileged argument depending on the voice marking on the predicate head.
Right, right. So first of all, noted. I'm gonna use it because I'm still diagnosing.
Then
I'm
I'm
still diagnosing. Part of the paper analysis of the paper is how to diagnose. I mean, diagnosing, presenting evidence that the PSA is PSA. So I have to identify and present evidence and present analysis and parang features of the subject, for example, features of coreness, for example, core status, halimbawa. All right. So I still do not have data on relative. clause constructions yet, or I might have it, but I have not gotten there yet. I have not gotten there yet. So this is noted. I will include that in my PSA analysis.
Ayan. So there's a comment. Is this from Vinci? So I sabi dito sa comment, I think northern Mindanao complexified general claims made on Philippine languages in the literature almost always based on Central Philippines. That's true. I agree. No, if we put together, no, what do you think? Like yung
Pero
findings in
yeah, yeah.
Cordillera.
I like perspectives such as this, no, but I also equally like perspectives when you turn them on their heads and say,
Uh-huh.
and I like the complexify na word, no, rather than simplify. Uh, pero what we might perceive as complexification, making complex something is might be, an enrichment might be an enrichment in the analysis. Nare-reveal yung mga areas, for example, where you can take the analysis, no? And these are always exciting for us. Tama ba, no? When we sit down and analyze the language, it's always exciting to have those doors open for us when the data reveals them.
Yes. So, do you have any more questions pa?
No more.
No more questions. Teka lang, I'll read you mga comments dito kung meron. Oh, may comment si Sir Aldrin. So, sabi niya, fantastic work, Hanelet. I wonder if periphrastic morphology facilitates grammatical features or semantic roles in the absence of aspectual marking or applicative derivation of oblique adjunct NPs.
Yes, sir. Not I will not say categorically, yes, sir, but like for example in yung differences, I will not say lack, but that the Bilic languages do not carry Blaan and Tboli do not carry a spectral marking. What the languages do is they use particles to encode completeness or completion, for example, of the action. And time or temporal elements are encoded because they're not encoded verbally anymore. They're not encoded on the verbs anymore. They have to be encoded um, in particles through particles. Mm-mm.
Mhm.
Sir Aldrin, by the way, is my dissertation advisor for this work.
Meron pa ba? Do you have other questions or comments? Teka lang. Let's see.
You're also looking. I'm also looking.
Oo. Teka lang, meron akong question eh. So I'm curious lang. So how do they express yung applicatives if you have already
Yung
found
mga
out?
locations, for example,
Uh-uh.
yung locative na ano. So, yung locative marking locatives, for example, pag sila ang subject ng sentence, they do not require any marking on the verb. Do not require any special marking on the verb anymore. No,
Oh,
so oo, that's why
ayan
ano,
naman.
gosh, I'm so scared of opening this door without two questions. And this is why I mentioned in my presentation that in my manuscript I demonstrate the complications of an ergative applicative analysis for Bilic because there are no motivations for an applicative analysis for Bilic kasi wala naman siyang walang yung how do I say this very simply? Yung location as subjects, for example, no, can happen without additional morphology on the verb. Oo. So
Okay.
wala na siyang we cannot analyze applicative marking. It's not there. So there's
Uh-huh.
no it's not
It's
for
not needed.
walang motivation for it.
Motivation for it. Okay, so Ang saya pa sana, no? Magkwentuhan na lang tayo sa iligan. Kasi we have to wrap up na daw.
Yay! Wrap up!
Congrats! Ayan. So, congrats. Thank you, my friend, for
Thank you, Rich. Always a pleasure.
engaging talk. So, we will give you a certificate. Wow. Yes, so we'll give you this certificate of appreciation for delivering a lecture titled Bilic, Some New Directions for Inquiry as part of the Philippine Indigenous Languages lecture series organized by the UP Department of Linguistics, given this 14th of April 2023. Signed, Maria Cristina S. Gallego, PhD. Yay!
Thank you.
Congratulations!
I think you speak also on behalf of Ridge. You're always grateful to the Department of Linguistics. They are always, I know, they always help us. They always,
Yes.
encourage us, and we discover things that we did not know we were capable of.
That's true. So yung mga nakikinig dyan who's planning to pursue,
Right, join us.
oh,
Join us in the UP
yes,
Department of
join the
Linguistics.
department. Doon na kayo mag-aral next sem. Ayan, may plug pa tayo. So, but that's true. So, the department is a different kind of community. It's
Correct.
a
Very,
different
very.
community. So, join us. And, ayun, maraming salamat ulit, Hanilet. And for those of you who are tuned in to our live streams, many thanks to you as well for sticking with us. I hope na you've learned a lot. And also, we would also like you to stay tuned for more events and activities by our department in commemoration of our 100th year. And next month, meron ulit pills. So watch out for that. We don't know what that is pa. And also, we'd like to remind you we have another lecture series, yung special lecture series, a linguistic special lecture series on April 20. So there's another, for more details, you can check out yung Facebook page ng department. And also, deadline ngayon ng abstract submission ng
Yes,
Philippine
please.
Linguistics Congress. So,
Right.
habol na. Pwede pa. Hanggang 12 midnight ba yan for the crammers? This is the day. Ayan, nahahabol din siguro ako. So, and Hanilat, would you like to promote our
Yes.
event?
Thank you very much, Range. I'd like to take this opportunity to invite everybody to the LSPIC 2023. This is the fifth international conference of the Linguistic Society of the Philippines. This is happening in person in my university, MSU Iligan Institute of Technology. This is in Iligan City, Lanao del Norte in Mindanao. All flights, you can take flights from Manila to Cagayan de Oro, CGY. You will land in Laguindingan Airport. The LSPIC 2023 is happening on April 27 to 29, 2 weeks from now, I think. 2 weeks
Yes.
from now.
Ayun. So, see you all sa, ano naman, sa MSUIIT. I'm also very excited for that na now. So, ayun. So, ayun lang. Thank you very much again to everyone. Thank you, Hanelet. Thank you sa mga audience natin who joined us this afternoon. So, that's it. Have a great day. Ayan, have a great afternoon. Enjoy the rest
Bye-bye.
of the day. Bye-bye.